This is Yeti Dude. Hello, Yeti Dude.
Well, hello.
He's also my husband, Dave, which I love. And yeah, so we're here today to do our first, or I guess my first, book club for Punch Life Back. And right now I'm calling it the Badass Book Club, basically because I don't have a better, snappier title yet.
Well, what could be better?
I think a lot of things. I'm guessing a lot of names. Yeah, I basically want, yay, Tika Maher is here and she can hear us great. She says, I hear you great, both of you. Woohoo! So, Yeti Dude, Dave, can you, do you have Punch Life Back chat up? Can you see the comments people are making?
I do and I can't.
Okay, cool. You do love badass. Okay, well, for now, I think it's fine. It doesn't feel right quite yet. So we'll get one. And if anybody has ideas, I would love to steal it from you. Yeah. So I thought we could just start. So my idea for the book club is we do one book club a month, and I always have somebody join me. And since my husband was in the other room when I had the idea, and he said yes, that's why it's you. And it was also a really tricky way to get you to read the book that I've wanted you to read for years.
I always manipulate. I see.
Uh-huh.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's what marriage is about. Yep. Marry the person who's low-hanging fruit. Use them for the rest of your life. It's great. Hooray! Tiki Maher says hooray. I'm not sure if she's celebrating the fact that marriage is about low-hanging fruit. I don't really know how long the stream delay is. But yeah, so the book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I've talked about it, I don't know, pretty consistently over the last month on my cast, mainly because it's amazing, but it's also like the kernel that led to our modern conception of what the meaning of life is. So I like to start with it, and it's still really, really relevant. But what I found was a 8-minute video on YouTube where someone did in cartoons like a really great summary of the book. So in case people who are, yeah, I didn't give it to you.
Before we get to that video,
yeah,
it's going to be interesting because the book literally starts the first half about being in concentration camps for World War II.
You cut out.
It's going to be an interesting video because the first half of the book is literally him in concentration camps in World War II. So it'll be fascinating to see what this cartoon looks like.
Well, okay, so I'll preface it this way. I believe I fast forwarded the beginning, which has like a warning statement that says like this might be too graphic for some viewers, because I just was like, it's not graphic at all. It just talks, just references a horrible situation. But it's not that kind of a cart. It's not like an anime that like cuts off people's heads and stuff.
I'm basically almost picturing like the original Hobbit cartoon that like had the really creepy animated humans.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm hoping we see.
So Tiki Maher is saying that she has to confess that she ordered the book, but by her error, she got the 33-minute summary.
That's pretty good because the actual book only takes like 2 hours. So you got like the summary is a quarter of the book.
Yeah, now I'm giving you for free an 8-minute somebody else's 8-minute summary too. It's not even my work, which I love being able to share. Yeah, so let's just watch it. And yeah, I didn't give it to you. I made you read the book, Dave, because I am your wife and I manipulate you, and it's all for your betterment. It's all fine. You know what's happening. Okay, so for this, let's see. I'm working on the tech side, switching it over to the video. We're gonna lose Yeti Dude's beautiful face for a second. There we go. All right. Why? Anybody hearing anything? I'm not hearing anything.
During the Holocaust in the 1940s, Viktor Frankl spent 3 years as a prisoner in the Auschwitz and Dachau concentration camps. His wife, father, mother, and brother died in these camps. He was faced with extreme hunger, debilitating illnesses, and brutal living conditions. Yet unlike the prisoners around him, he somehow managed to find hope and meaning during one of the most catastrophic events in human history. It's no wonder Man's Search for Meaning sold over 10 million copies and became one of the most influential books in the world. With that said, let's have a look at 3 powerful lessons we can learn from the book. Lesson 1. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. Frankl was confronted by a fellow inmate. Let's call him Felix. Felix shared a dream he had in February 1945. A voice told him he could wish for something, so he wished to know when he would be liberated from the concentration camp and have his sufferings come to an end. The voice replied, March the 30th. Felix had a strong sense of hope and was convinced the voice in his dream was right. As the date ticked closer, the war got worse, making it appear to be very unlikely that freedom was near. On March the 29th, Felix suddenly became ill. On March the 30th, the day he expected to be free, he lost consciousness. On March the 31st, he was dead. To paraphrase Frankl's own words, the ultimate cause of my friend's death was that the expected liberation did not come and he was severely disappointed. This suddenly lowered his body's resistance against the latent typhus infection. His faith in the future and his will to live had become paralyzed, and his body fell victim to illness. And thus, the voice of his dream was right after all. To back up this case, a chief doctor of the concentration camp witnessed an increased death rate of prisoners between Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945. The doctor believed this was due to prisoners having false hope that they would be home again by Christmas. As the time drew near, many lost hope and fell into an endless sleep. So you might be asking, what can we learn from these stories? Well, Frankl sums it up by saying, any attempt to restore a man's inner strength in the camp had first to succeed in showing him some future goal. Whenever there was an opportunity for it, one had to give them a why, an aim for their lives, in order to strengthen them to bear the terrible how of their existence. Basically, the prisoners who found a reason to live had a stronger will to live and chance of coming out alive, and those without a reason to keep going increased their likelihood of severe illness and death. Frankl goes on to describe 2 prisoners who were contemplating suicide. They used the typical argument that they had nothing more to expect from life, but they didn't commit suicide. Why? Because they found meaning, a reason to keep going. For one, it was his child waiting for him in a foreign country. The other man was a scientist who had written a series of books which still needed to be finished. A man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears toward a human being who affectionately waits for him, or to an unfinished work, will never be able to throw away his life. He knows the why for his existence, and will be able to bear almost any how. Lesson 2. Love is the ultimate and highest goal to which a man can aspire. Frankl emphasizes that everyone's meaning is completely unique, and that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which a man can aspire. It was one man's love for his child that kept him pushing forward, and for another, it was his love for sharing his findings with the world through books. For Frankl himself, it was a love for his wife that kept him going. He realized the power of love on a cold, dark day where he and his inmates were commanded to march out to a work site. The emaciated prisoners were beaten and forced to trudge over large stones and icy terrain. One inmate whispered to Frankl, "If our wives could see us now, I do hope they are better off in their camps and don't know what is happening to us." Upon reflecting on this time in the past, Frankl said, "I did not know whether my wife was alive, and I had no means of finding out. But at that moment it ceased to matter. There was no need for me to know. Nothing could touch the strength of my love, my thoughts, and the image of my beloved. Had I known then that my wife was dead, I think that I would still have given myself, undisturbed by that knowledge, to the contemplation of her image, and that my mental conversation with her would have been just as vivid and just as satisfying. The final lesson is this: when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Before Frankl was put in a concentration camp, he was working as a clinical psychiatrist. He once had a client with severe depression. Let's call him Peter. Peter could not overcome the loss of his wife, who died 2 years ago. Frankl asked him, "What would have happened if you had died first and your wife would have had to survive for you?" "Oh," he said, "for her this would have been terrible. She would have suffered." Frankl replied, "You see, Peter, such a suffering has been spared, and it was you who have spared her this suffering." He said nothing, shook Frankl's hand, and calmly left the office. Frankl said, "In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." Of course, this was no therapy in the proper sense, since first, his despair was no disease, and second, I could not change his fate. I could not revive his wife. But in that moment, I did succeed in changing his attitude toward his unalterable fate, and he could now at least see a meaning in his suffering. In the world today, countless people who've found themselves in seemingly hopeless circumstances have found meaning in their lives. Nick Vujicic is a living example. He was born with no arms or legs, but he overcame his disabilities to live an independent, rich, fulfilling life where he serves as a role model to help millions of people to overcome adversity and live meaningful lives. Some things in life are inevitable: the loss of loved ones, terminal illnesses, and forgotten memories. Whatever we do, man's search for meaning challenges us to accept that we cannot avoid suffering, but we can choose how to cope with it, find meaning in it, and move forward.
Alright, gonna bring Yeti Dude back. I believe I can handle that. Yay! Yeah, I feel like it wasn't a Saturday morning cartoon.
No.
I kind of maybe
pretty well done.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite part that wasn't well done was Peter, after he had the insight of, by your wife dying first and you surviving her, you saved her the suffering. And then Peter's like has more meaning, but he like is still the same Peter, like sad, and like just flips over.
Yeah.
Instead of like changing the yay. Yeah.
If I remember the story, that Peter, after he was told that, thanked him, shook his hand, and left.
Yeah.
A very basic, my world has changed. I'm not happy, but I'm not miserable anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, on the one hand, that sucks, right? Like, I'm slightly better than I was before I was here, and yet on the other hand, that's huge, too. Like, when life, like, you've gone through a horrible event, and, like, everything is bad about it, to be able to change your perspective and find some meaning in it, some, like, reason for it to be there, or some reason to accept it, like he's saving his wife from the suffering, like that is still a huge win. It's just, I think we want a fix. Like we want life to be happy again and perfect again.
Well, it's fascinating. It's a great story.
Oh, I don't know why I don't hear you.
Can you hear me
Is
now?
it on your end or my end?
I don't know. Let me check. I think it might be on your end.
I still can't hear you. Okay, but I can hear music, so. It's on your end.
It's on my end?
Oh, there you go. Now you're there.
All right. It's quieter than the music. I think it's a fascinating story, and it makes sense why he put it in there, because a lot of what he talks about is with logotherapy, the style that he prefers.
Hey, Tiki Meher, can you hear Dave? Okay, so that's me this time. What the F? like my tech works until I start streaming.
That's how it always goes.
I still can't hear you.
Let me check here.
Okay, I hear you now. She says, yes, I hear Dave. Our culture, so Tiki Bear is saying that our culture promotes the happy ever after.
Well, so that's what I was going to say is the story of him coming in and getting the suggestion of, imagine if the roles were reversed, you're saving your wife from the suffering. A lot of what Frankl talks about is the logotherapy, and they do the first two, which is the live for something greater. The second one is find loving moments, whether it's in a experience or a person or thing, that type of deal. But they say the third one, which he says is the most important, is basically find meaning in suffering.
Yeah.
Like that's the big goal, and the reason being, and to quote from the book,
hot damn, way to go.
Yeah,
way to go, Dave. Bring it.
Actually, I'm going to paraphrase because the quote's a little bit different, but it's if there's meaning in life, there's also meaning in suffering, because suffering is part of life.
Yeah.
And in the tail end of the book, he talks a lot about how I lost it. All right. Well, if I remember it, I'll come back to it. But that the meaning in suffering is one of the most important aspects of life, because suffering is inevitable.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, but suffering doesn't necessarily, the society, as Tiki put it, happy ever after.
Mm-hmm.
Our common thought is that if we suffer, we should be ashamed of the suffering. We don't want the public to know we're suffering. We don't want our friends to know we're suffering. Like, it's something that should be embarrassed by. And a very big thing that he talks about is more, suffering is just an aspect of life. There's no reason to be ashamed of it. There's no reason to be embarrassed of it. And that's what a large focus of the second half of the book is, just kind of getting to those points, which, I really liked. Like, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it goes a lot towards our, the common new phrases are, be who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes a lot towards that, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'm really happy you mentioned it, because so happy ever after, right, is the dream. And what you're saying is, like, within that, when you ascribe to that in our society, you're also saying, well, when it's not that way, I have to hide it.
Yep.
Right? Like, I'm ashamed of it, or I can't share it. And then you offer this idea of, well, just be yourself includes the shit. It includes the inevitable losses. And that by embracing the suffering and being true about the suffering, you're actually, it's a way to actually fulfill the be yourself. Because when I hear a pithy phrase like that, it's like, well, that's great. How the fuck do I do it?
Yeah.
Who am I? Like, right? And how do I be myself?
Yep.
But yeah, honoring where you're at, whether it's whatever part of your life you're in, and if you've just had, a tragedy or whatever. Yeah. Okay. I see Tiki's talking.
Yep.
I want to bring the music down. It's really distracting me. So Tiki says, yeah, we are embarrassed.
I'm the exact same way. With her, if I need help, I often feel I need to be the one to fix it. Mm-hmm. It's the exact same way for me.
Yeah, I would say yes, that's absolutely true. Because I know you so well.
And I don't think his purpose in the book was to say, find help. Right. I think it was more, suffering and trials and difficulties aren't necessarily the huge obstacles. They're not necessarily something that you have to fix. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're things that you just need to
endure,
find the meaning of. And he gets a little bit religious at times and then pulls back of it. And there's definitely times where he's like, the meaning why are you suffering? What's the goal? And then he talks a little bit. He's Jewish, obviously. Well, mostly obviously because he was in the concentration camps. And so he pulls some of that in, but it doesn't need to be a religious meaning. Like he makes that very clear that, it's just finding something in it that turns it from, a big pile of dog shit into, something you're working through.
Yeah. That for me brings up what I love about what he is proposing is that ultimately it's our individual responsibility to make meaning out of our life and to make meaning out of our suffering, that nobody else can do it for you. Other people can help you find it if they ask you like interesting questions that you haven't thought of before, but ultimately it's something that comes from your own brain that is completely unique to you. Like maybe nobody else in the world finds meaning the way you find it, but that you have to take responsibility for it. So if you're going through one of life's horrible situations, when people go through adversity or trauma, there's a bell curve, and most people I forget the time frame, but within like 6 months or a year, go to the middle of the bell curve, like where they're back to normal or where they were before the adversity. Now there's also people who have post-traumatic stress or other consequences where they go to the left of the bell curve where they're doing worse than they were before the trauma. But then there's those people who after the trauma are thriving, are better than they've ever been. And I think Viktor Frankl is telling us a large part of why that happens. They're able to say, yes, this happened, but this is what it means, and this is how my life is more powerful now because of it.
Yep.
And they're really able to take that. And I love this because something that pisses me off, just in our culture and on Twitter and stuff, is there seems to be an epidemic of people not taking responsibility for their shit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Or they're feeling that the world is out to get them, and they're just always a victim, and they're always complaining. They're the people who complain but don't ever put forward possible solutions. They're mad because you haven't fixed it yet. And Viktor Frankl is saying at the core of who you are, whether or not you're happy or you have a purpose, and more importantly, how you handle the hardest things in life depends on whether or not you're willing to finally take responsibility for yourself.
Yep.
I just think that's so it's empowering.
Yeah, that's the word I was thinking of. Is it's putting you back in charge of your own life.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much regardless of your circumstance.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. If you wonder why I keep looking down, I have my Kindle.
Oh, you've got your quotes out.
So I've got some quotes, and I don't have any right now, but that's what I keep referring to when I look down.
That's awesome. I wasn't wondering. I didn't think you were texting somebody else. You're on Twitter complaining. That's what you're doing. So Tiki Meher says, when I get really angry, I get busy cleaning out old crap in my closet or clean the house or whack a hedge. Yeah, that, I mean, I think it's helpful to express your anger or your angst, and using your body in any sort of exercise, even if it's organizing or whatever, I think can really help. And that might be one of the reasons why you like it.
It sounds to me like you're actually basically with your anger finding things you can control in your own life. So cleaning out the closet, getting rid of old crap. It's basically saying, okay, well, I can improve these areas of my life. The whacking a hedge, I'm picturing you with a bat out there hitting a hedge, which is a fantastic view, which I assume isn't what happens, but it should be.
She says, absolutely. I'm saying that's about the bat and not the other stuff. So what do we think? We talked about the first lesson, which is we're responsible, and then that meaning is unique to the individual. He also has this layer of that, which is whatever meaning you find, the powerful ones are the ones that are connected to love of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So it's connected to what you love. And what that brings up for me was the example in the video of his friend who his meaning was like a false hope. Like he ascribed it to being free by a certain date. And then like that literally killed him because he realized he wasn't going to be free by that date. And then his immune system went down and he died. And like, I don't know if that's actually what killed him, but I've heard enough stories anecdotally of like still around the holidays, like suicide goes up, you know, people lose a lot of meaning and purpose around the holidays.
Well, and that's actually the next paragraph right after that story talks about how there's a bunch of deaths in late January, early February for that specific reason, that they were hoping they would be able to be home for the holidays.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I just wonder, because as a life coach, right, like one of my primary skill sets is helping people uncover what their individual meaning is. And I'm thinking, oh crap, like what if they're coming up with their version of I'll be free by March 30th, right? Because it seems like what that says is there are bad meanings you can ascribe that aren't really going to help you thrive or overcome the tragedy, but might actually kill you in certain situations. Or there's more constructive meanings that are maybe more powerful, and that maybe the difference is one is connected to what you love.
I would argue that the idea of freedom by March 30th wasn't really a meaning. Yeah, they had put a deadline, and they had actually increased the potential suffering because they weren't actually choosing to live for something. It wasn't like, okay, this is what I'm moving forward with. It was, this needs to happen by this date.
Yeah.
So I think the meaning has to be almost something ongoing in that scenario.
Yeah.
You know,
like something that it has to endure. Like if you're gonna endure, your meaning has to be able to endure too. Yeah. Like no one else can really take it away from you.
He talks later about a woman that he was working with who had she had lost her son, and then she had tried to commit suicide with her and her older son, who was crippled. And the older son actually stopped the suicide. And so they were meeting, I assume it was kind of a suicide survivor group, because there were multiple people there. And he had asked one of them, you know, how old are you? She said 30. He said, nope, you're 80. You're in bed. You're at the end of your life. You went on to become extremely wealthy, extremely successful. Tell me about your life and tell me whether what meaning you found out of life. And I was like, okay, well, I married a multimillionaire. I had everything that I desired, everything I wanted. I was able to go do everything that I cared for. I lived a carefree life. And my life had no meaning. I didn't do anything that gave me meaning. And so he asked the same question of the woman who had tried to commit suicide. And he said, okay, you're 80, you're on your deathbed, which is a little young.
Yeah, it is. Maybe not back then, but yes.
Tell me about your life. And she thought about it for a second. She said, well, I chose not to have my oldest son institutionalized. I chose to be his caretaker, the one to help him around. And because of that, I was able to give him a full life, a better life. I was able to bring happiness and joy to the world, both through myself and him. My life had full meaning. And that was her transition from, I lost my youngest son, oh my God, this trauma. And that's how she found the meaning, was that she was able to bring a full life to somebody who would outlive her.
Yeah.
So a lot of the meanings that he goes with they're not so goal oriented. there's not really a specific date. There's not really a
Mhm.
specific, if I can get 12 people $100,
Right.
it's very much, I want to improve X,
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because it means that you never actually fully achieve your meaning.
Yeah. But that is like, but that's why it endures.
Mhm.
And that's why
Yeah.
if you want to endure the hardest things in life, like he who can bear any, or has a why can bear almost any how. I think the only how you can't endure is like death, right? Because that ends you. But other than that, like if you want to endure, your meaning has to be endurable. Like nobody else can really take it from you. Like, and I think that's what Viktor Frankl, because I didn't like the first time I read the book, the first 2 times I read the book, I didn't really understand how Viktor Frankl could say, even if I had known my wife was dead, my life still would have had meaning in my brain as I talk to her. Like
Mhm.
that would have been just as meaningful as if she was there with me. I didn't really understand that, but in this context I do. That it's like even her death, like that love he felt for her endured and could bring him positive emotions. It could bring him hope even in the worst of circumstances.
Yeah, the love was unaffected by whether she was still alive or not. There was sadness that would have come with knowing
Yeah.
she wasn't, but the love, which was the anchor emotion that he was going for, that was irrelevant to whether she was alive or not, which is, I understand that. It's cool.
I'm glad
Yeah,
you understand that.
Well, you're gonna outlive me, so
No! I'm gonna remember him talking to Peter when you die. And I'll be like, that's right. I saved him the suffering of losing me. The other way I could save you the suffering of losing me is I could just be a total bitch. Like a horrendous person to you in like the last 10 years of our life. And then it won't matter.
It'll be that with me with my Santa Claus beard.
Oh no. You already have it. It's just not completely white. I had a serious thought. What was it?
Oh, Tiki, that's absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. And they do talk a bit about that in the book.
What part, Dave? She has 2 comments there.
Do it for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
She'd want that for me, even though she's passed.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that's in relation to what we were talking about with his wife passing. That it's kind of like, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, they talk about in the book, like when you're
my headset keeps cutting out.
How's your mouse work?
I think you just said something really wise. I'll just nod.
No. So they talk about in the book, when you're suffering, remember that somebody is looking down on you.
Yeah.
And are you finding the meaning out of it that they would want you to find?
Mm-hmm.
Are you suffering in a way that they would approve of?
Mm-hmm.
Basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of power. And they say, somebody, God, whatever it is, basically suffer in a way that, someone that you respect would respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say is, so one of the most like up-to-date concepts of the meaning of life comes from positive psychology and Dr. Martin Seligman. And he talks about, like using your character strengths, which is a separate topic of conversation, but it's basically the stuff you're really good at in the service of something larger than yourself will bring you that feeling of meaning and purpose. That they find, like the psychologists find that if you don't have it, you're not going to be thriving in life. So I just think it's so cool that here we are, like Viktor Frankl discovered that basically for himself in the midst of this, like you can't even imagine, horrible situation. And that now that psychology is actually researching this, because for years they just ignored this side of psychology, but now they're actually researching it and coming up with saying, yeah, like Viktor Frankl was actually right. Like there's a lot he said here. So I just think of that part of love that Frankl talks about is the in service of something larger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really, like, I think what love does for us is it helps us get beyond ourselves, and we start thinking of somebody, and we put somebody else's needs or life ahead of our own. And I just think those two things are very, very connected.
Yeah, I was impressed. Frankl, every time he talks about, so that's the second part of logotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
is the love aspect. But he always broadens it to can also be experiences, not necessarily specifically people,
Mm-hmm.
which I kind of appreciate, that your life can be about something more than being a servant to somebody.
Yeah.
Which, and I mean the servant more in the biblical sense of living your life for their betterment, not just I'm here to carry your dishes type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's where the individuality comes in,
Mm-hmm.
because if you genuinely love, like he uses the example of the scientist who wanted to put his discoveries out in the world and finish writing his books. Like Frankl himself, like found a lot of meaning in surviving the war so that he could write the book we're talking about today.
Yep.
Right? And he could develop logotherapy. So like he himself had a deep abiding love for the adding some sort of contribution to the world that only he's capable of contributing. And that's just as valuable as the mom who decided to take care of her crippled son and not institutionalize him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful thing, because and that's like why I think they phrase it in service of something larger than yourself, in service of something, not necessarily someone.
Yeah. I've been trying to remember, and you brought the quote during your sick cast that Frankl uses for logotherapy, and I'm trying to remember. It was something like live each moment as if you can fix the mistakes.
Oh, that quote. Yeah, let me see.
Lived it before.
Yeah, like live as if you're living for a second time and you messed up the first time. It's something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one I still struggle with that one. And what he's really meaning by that. So Tiki Meher says, as our children grow, they need to be allowed time to explore and discover their passions so they have reasons to endure suffering. Yeah. And that Tiki Meher brings up for me, like, some of my friends have parents that were really judgmental of their children's passions. And that, like, kind of breaks my heart in this context in a whole new way. Because if our meaning for life that helps us survive absolutely any circumstance emotionally is supposed to be unique to the individual, and the parent says the way you want to ascribe meaning to your life is shit, and it's not okay, like you're taking that love away from your kid that could have saved them, that could have brought them meaning and purpose. And that's just so sad. It's so sad. Yeah. I'm looking for that quote too.
If you want, we can put that on hold. You said you had some quotes that you kind of wanted to go over?
Yeah, I have a bunch of stuff. So, let's see. Where are we on time? Oh, cool. We're good. So that, like, this, okay, so I have a quote that says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that corresponds with the third lesson from that video, which is we can't change a situation, but we can change ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's related to meaning. Like that's that's the biggest way that we like change the whole perspective of the suffering into something that is adding value to our life instead of just taking value. But this goes more granular than that. And it's like, hey, literally, like, if you can't change a situation, don't give up.
Yeah.
Like, don't like just become the Twitter hater that you sometimes are. Like, work on yourself. Because it's like how you react is in your brain, and how you're like what makes a situation so unbearable is it's about taking responsibility again. It's about, in large part, it's about how you're viewing it and the stuff you're telling yourself about the situation, about the other people, that creates the reality.
It's also great because it's a little bit of an instructional on how to find meaning in suffering. Like, it's kind of the first step is it's finding what you have control over in something that feels wild and uncontrolled.
Yeah.
And that's a huge first step to do.
Yeah, and I want to say that most of the work I do as a coach is in helping people do this step. Like, realize that they are in control of the situation, and that they're in control because they're in control of the thoughts that they're telling themselves. You know, because like last week we were talking about anger on my cast, right? And like, that's such a powerful emotion, but like, you're literally generating your anger based on what you're telling yourself about the situation. And like, I just love the idea of responsibility. Like, you are, like, the buck absolutely stops with you. And that seems true. Like, I would love to be challenged on that, you know, and like, under what circumstances is that really not true? But I haven't found one yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are our own universe. You know, we're gods of our own universe. There's always something, our behavior, we can always control. And that's empowering. That's a really powerful thought and action.
Yeah, if this wasn't true, like, we wouldn't see people like Nick Vujicic that he mentioned. He's amazing.
Yeah.
But like, we would not see him. We would not have that motivational version of him.
Yep.
Right? If you weren't in control of yourself, if you couldn't take responsibility, like, you know, people that have chronic pain or people that are dying, like, nobody would be noble. You know, nobody would be brave. Like, all of these virtues that are hard to attain, they just wouldn't exist. Right? Like, if people couldn't take responsibility for themselves.
Yep.
Okay, I'm looking at more. So some of these we've already covered, so I'm kind of just going.
One of the ones I liked, which is kind of early in the book, says, although suffering is omnipresent, to draw an analogy, a man's suffering is similar to the behavior of gas. If a certain quantity of gas is pumped into an empty chamber, it'll fill the chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. I really, it was interesting that he put that in there, and it goes back towards, you know, suffering is a part of life, and it's accurate. Like, we, especially for me, like, there will be small inconveniences when otherwise my life is going well, and I'll be like, oh man, this is brutal. And the reality is, it's not a thing. But when we feel suffering, we feel completely, regardless of the actual level of suffering. So I like that analogy, and then in finding meaning in it, suddenly, you know, the gas goes from an extremely poisonous gas to something that's not so bad.
Yeah, it's kind of like in a way, suffering is a sliding scale, and on like the low end, we've got like your tire goes flat, right? And at the high end, you're like, oh fuck, someone just murdered my entire family. You know, like this huge range of things. And yet what he's saying is that, and I think what you're saying, and it's not 100% true, but it's largely true, that the difference between like where something lands on the scale is the story you tell yourself, and whether or not you are creating meaning out of it. Because you can have your tire go out and then it like ruins your day, or some people let it ruin their week, you know, and they just let a negative attitude spiral out of control, and then they hurt their relationships because of it, right? Like, you can make a mountain out of molehill. But he's saying that you can also make a mountain into a molehill and take it the other way by creating meaning, which is pretty cool. Yes, and it does, Tiki Meher. You can find meaning in anything. I like this quote. Meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone, so the person alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. So again, that to me says, like we're so good at judging ourselves, and we're also really good at judging other people. This is interesting to me, I think, because I'm a coach, right? So like it's warning me, like, don't ever judge somebody for what they tell you is meaningful to them, right? Like, just know that it is meaningful, and that's all that matters. Because like we're all like crazy unique, and there's an infinite amount of reasons people tell themselves not to like answer that like meaning, that like calling that they're having to create something. And if you give into that, or if somebody agrees with you and shuts you down because they agree with you, the world is never going to get what only you could create. And I think that's why, again, it's not just about loving somebody or being in service to somebody, but maybe in a way it's about being of service to yourself. And just trusting that whatever that thing is that you really, really want to create, that feels so meaningful to you, like, you should just fucking do it. You know, and like absolutely overcome anything to do it, because that's where you're gonna have meaning in life. And don't let anybody judge you for it, because meaning is you're responsible for your meaning. And I'm gonna keep talking in circles about this.
So your thoughts on that sparked a thought on my end, which he didn't go over in the book, but I kind of think the meaning can be transitory. You know, of course, what you feel in the moment and having it be a powerful enough meaning is absolutely fantastic. But just because you choose one thing doesn't mean you're now stuck on that one thing. You know, if it's powerful enough, you're going to be on it. But if that suddenly no longer is your meaning, you don't have to kick yourself for it. You can keep working through it and keep, you know, find your new meaning, which is kind of cool too. And back to the, you know, you be you.
Yeah. I missed the middle half of what you said because of my headset. It
was more or less the beginning and the end.
Oh my God, what was I going to say? It was relevant. I think it was relevant. Oh, fuck it. There you go, folks. You're about to have your life changed, and my headset went out again. What was the very first part of that? Can you cue my brain, like prompt it?
So what you were saying, and
no, you can't, because I can't hear you. There you go. You laughed, and I can hear you.
What you were saying spawned my thought, which didn't happen in the book, which was meaning can be transient.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what modern research on meaning says, is that it's not like you're looking for one thing that's going to fulfill you for all of eternity or be meaningful and motivating to you for all of eternity. There is that, like, those really powerful ones that, like you were saying, kind of sustain themselves. Like, you're my husband, I love you. Like, I can see that being a meaningful contribution to my life for the rest of my life, right? So, like, on the one hand, that's probably going to be a constant. Let's hope. But yeah, but we literally, the thing about meaning is we can, and by choosing to, you can create it in any given moment of your life. And that you can draw meaning from absolutely anything. And so it's not like we have to, like, write our own Bible, you know, like come up with, like, the religious text of Catherine and then live by it. It's more like, in this moment, what is meaningful to me? Like, does it give me a sense of purpose? Or, you know, and like, and yeah. So, and I can go on and on, because it, like, that helps counter boredom. It helps counter stress. So it's actually kind of like an exercise we could use in the moment. And in a way, I love it because it reminds me not to take myself so seriously. Right? Like, take myself seriously, to like respect myself enough to do the work, but not to like be so heavy-handed with it that it becomes a stressful thing in and of itself. But I see Tiki has written us a nice thing here. She says, don't judge others' passions. I learned that early in real estate. Ooh. I opened the door to a house, almost gagged when I saw this pink carpet and was about to suggest they change it, yet I waited. The lady said, I love the pink, and they have it everywhere. Tubs, sinks, toilets. Let's buy it. Oh, that's a fun example. Yeah, and that's like also an example of you overcoming the cultural norm, right? Because as a real estate agent, you're taught like overly unique homes don't sell.
Yep.
And yet there is a buyer for absolutely everything. You just have to connect them. That's fun. Oh, I really like this one. He said, are you ready for a new quote?
Yes.
Okay, so he says, suffering is not always a pathological phenomenon. Rather than being a symptom of neurosis, suffering may well be a human achievement, especially if the suffering grows out of an existential frustration, a man's concern, even his despair over the worthwhileness of life. So basically worrying about whether life is worthwhile is an existential distress, but not a mental disease. So I like this because he's normalizing suffering. Yep. Right? Because like when something bad happens, like again, we don't talk about it. And like if you go to therapy, there's still a stigma attached to that, which is unfortunate. Yep. But I had another thought about this. If you have one, throw it out.
So the two thoughts I had were, oh shoot!
We're just sitting. Can we really like give each other brain farts from the digital domain?
So this part kind of reminded me, and the parts of the book reminded me of a Buddhist lesson, and a student went to a teacher and said, what happens when we die? Mm. And the Buddhist teacher said, it doesn't matter. And the student was really upset. It was like, well, that's not an answer. Like I want to know what's at the end. And the Buddhist teacher was like, well, what's at the end doesn't matter. It's what's today that matters. Mm. And that a lot of aspects of the book and a lot of what you said, it's like a sister statement. Yeah. It really is like embracing the day, whether it's suffering, whether it's not. And so that was one of my thoughts. And I forgot the other one that linked the two together, but you just have to be creative.
Like a sister idea too that comes out of this for me is that like unless we normalize suffering and stop trying to pretend that we all live happily ever after, right? Mm-hmm. One of the side effects of a culture that doesn't accept suffering is that we don't know how to talk to people who are suffering, who have gone through a traumatic event. Like, unless you yourself have gone through it and have felt like how you want to be talked to or not talked to or whatever, people just don't know how to talk to you. They don't know how to interact with you if you're suffering and they know you're suffering. And they either, in my experience, like don't connect with you and they just kind of leave you alone, or they pretend it didn't happen. Yeah. But like one of the best things I think to do if you're unsure about how to talk to somebody who's you think is suffering is just to own it. Be like, hey, I don't know, like what you want me to say, what you don't want me to say, but just know that like I'm acknowledging where you're at, like just some sort of statement about like I'm here and I'm really sorry you're going through this, something that you don't hide from it, but you like let it be messy, and you help the other person be vulnerable by being vulnerable yourself and just owning that you have no idea what you're doing, but that it's all okay. Like, but like hiding the suffering just kind of sucks.
Yep. Well, and everyone suffers in a unique way. So the honest approach that you're talking about is fantastic.
Yeah. Hey, the Mrs. Scott Evans just joined us. Hello, hello, Mrs. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, and we do, like, Tiki Meher, we do, like, that's, like, yeah, it would be great to have coaching on how to talk to somebody who's suffering, and how to normalize it. But if you don't have that, if you can't role play with somebody, or you don't have someone to show you the ropes, like, I think just do the brave thing and own your uncertainty and be honest with the person, especially because chances are you know this person really well, right? Or you know them well enough to risk that vulnerable thing, I think.
I actually highlighted a quote that kind of goes along with this from the book. And it says, when a man finds that it's his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept his suffering as his task, his single and unique task. He will have to acknowledge the fact that even in suffering, he is unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve him of his suffering or suffer in his place. His unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden.
Yeah.
And it goes very much to, like, everyone's going to suffer in a unique way. And as far as we were talking about how to talk with somebody who is suffering, that's why the honest approach works, is because what you're going through might be different than what they're going through, or what you perceive that they were going through. And from the person who's suffering perspective, again, this is the not being ashamed of the suffering. It is part of what their life is. And it's their goal to find meaning in that suffering, to be empowered on how they embrace that suffering, how they engage in their own personal suffering.
Yeah, there's something really, like, it gets me emotionally. There's something really noble about this idea of how you endure the suffering. And of course, he's talking about how are you creating meaning out of it. You know, and it brings to mind too, like, it seems like every time I'm talking to a friend who, so these are friends who are Americans, and, like, so, you know, roughly really well off compared to a lot of the world, no matter kind of where you're at on the economic spectrum in our country. And, like, you know, they're going about the stuff that's, like, currently causing them suffering. And it's, you know, it tends to be, on a global perspective, the stuff on the lower end of the spectrum, right? Kind of like a tire going flat. But there seems to be a moment where my friends, like, discount their suffering because they know where it's at on the spectrum. And I understand that, and there's value in it. I relate to that. And yet Frankl is saying something maybe different than that, which is, like, even if your suffering is on the lower side of the spectrum, it's your unique suffering.
Yep.
Like, don't discount it. Don't throw it away. Like, deal with it. You know, like...
And that goes directly to kind of where we started with all that, was the, you know, we're kind of taught to be ashamed of our suffering. And discounting it is almost how we handle the being ashamed. By, you know, the self-deprecating almost for the suffering. And, you know, the reality is, yeah, there are small levels of suffering. You know, you stub your toe. Is it the same as the Holocaust? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But it is still suffering.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I completely agree and think that, yeah, you're right and he's right.
Well, the word self-deprecating, it's like, okay, so there's a difference between, like, expanding your perspective and saying, wow, okay, this is a first world problem. That's just helping maybe shift your perspective so that you can then work with it with a little bit more space and deal with it, like, rationally.
Yep.
That's helpful versus, oh, this is a first world problem. How dare I?
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, poor me. Like, why should I? And then, like, you, like, add shit on top of yourself that, like, compounds your suffering. That's not helpful. And Frankl would be like, that's not creating meaning. You know, that's not helpful at all. So it's like, I have a two-edged sword.
A good time to move forward with this one is later in the book, he talks about how logotherapy helps people who are suffering. And he talks about one of the educational purposes he does for a gentleman who is really stressed about how much he sweats in front of other people. And he says, all right, I challenge you to see how much you can sweat in front of me. He says, well, that seems a bit odd. So yeah, now instead of worrying that you are sweating, see if you can beat your last one. And so the guy spent the week, I felt like I sweat a quart yesterday when I was talking to the person. Let's see if I can do 4 quarts today. And by having it not be something that he was trying to hide mentally, just for his own interpersonal communication, and having it be something, making it kind of a goofy goal. And the guy recognized it was a goofy goal, but it took away the stigma for him, which reduced the stress that it created, which reduced the anxiety and the suffering. And to the point where the guy felt, he'd been almost completely cured within 1 week, which is crazy. And they talk about he has a similar story with a woman who was OCD on cleaning, same type of thing. It took longer, but by addressing those issues instead of hiding from them.
Yep. Yeah, in my acting, I had something really similar, which was, you do a ton of training as an actor, right? And a lot of that has to be around how you audition. And everybody's trying to teach you how to be confident and not to be scared when you audition. I never, ever, ever got to that point. Ever. There was always fear, which makes total sense because I'm about to jump into a judgment bowl of judgment. And it's totally new. I've never met the people before. There's so much unknown. It made a lot of sense why being fearless and confident was really hard. But it wasn't until I just said, fuck it, I'm going to own the fact that I'm afraid and stop trying to pretend I was confident or hide what was really going on with me. That's when I got confident. That's when it wasn't an obstacle anymore. So it's there's something about when we don't own that suffering is a reality as a culture or as an individual, you're adding a giant obstacle onto it called inauthenticity. And I don't know anybody who is comfortable being inauthentic, right? Yeah. There's something about it that just makes you feel bad. It compounds the suffering. Instead of just owning it, make it a little bit easier, and then you can work with it.
Well, I think it almost doubles the fear because you already have a certain amount of anxiety initially, and then you are adding on the anxiety that they're going to find out that you're faking it.
Yeah, you're a fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Mrs. Scott Evans thinks what we're talking about is very interesting. Thank you for that. I do too, but I love hearing myself talk. Are you looking at quotes or are you texting on Twitter?
Texting on Twitter. It's a whole thing about being ashamed. No, I'm looking at quotes.
Well, I can't hear you, so whatever wonderful snide comment you just made. Thanks, Tiki Maher. I have a quote here that he says, we should not then be hesitant about changing man with a potential meaning for him to fulfill. It is only thus that we evoke his will to meaning from its state of latency. I like that. It's it's just latent. We all have it in us already. I have this overarching question, and I don't know where I'm ever going to find the answer, but it goes something like this. So we're talking about creating meaning and how we do that. And it seems to be that at the core of that, you have some sort of confirmation feeling inside yourself, right? It's meaningful because it feels meaningful. So I know that the confirmation bias exists for people. So I'm just wondering, why is it that knowing that the confirmation bias is out there, which is basically we search for validation of what we already believe. And when we find that validation, we get a rush of good feelings. We get a rush of confirmation and certainty. And it could be on a completely false belief. The world is flat, right? but you just continue holding it because of this confirmation bias. So I've got this like question around, how do we know we can trust our own sense of meaning? Right? Like, how do we, if our brains are wired to have a confirmation bias that can be full of errors, how is it that we can trust our own will to meaning? And this is, as a life coach, it's a really big question for me, because I help people define this for themselves. And I help people, like everything I do, right? Like I help people find what their core values are, like what's really important to them. That's like, and it all boils down to, well, those are your things because they feel like your things. Like people talk about having a calling in life. It's because you feel like you have a calling. So just like, how is it that, like, on what grounds do we trust that about ourselves?
The answer for me is, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I I'd say Viktor Frankl, from his writing, I would say he thinks it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that feeling, then you have that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's based in lots of logic, whether it's based on some ranking system that somebody else has for what should be your meaning,
Mm-hmm.
If you have it, you have it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough.
Yeah. I think if it wasn't for the piece of it being connected to love, whether it's loving something or loving a person, we could maybe get into ethical trouble, right? Because like maybe my will to me, like maybe what's meaningful to me is murdering people, right? But because that isn't how we work as human beings, unless you have like an abnormality, it's okay that we don't have to have proof that this is true,
mm-hmm.
right? Like we can just trust it because at the end of the day, it's about love, and love doesn't really, in its healthy state, hurt anybody. But if it wasn't for that, like I would want some way to judge the validity. Okay, so
yeah.
So Tiki says, I was just thinking what Dave said. It's like the Buddhist telling the questioning man about what happens when we die, and the Buddhist responded, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about defining meaning and whatnot, it's a little bit interesting what Frankl talks about. Let me see if I can find his specific thing here. So he says, from all his time in the concentration camp and the stories, we may learn that there are two races of men in this world, but only these two: the race of the decent man and the race of the indecent man.
Mm.
And you're saying, it'd be nice if we could validate, a person's meaning so that, we didn't run into the ethical issues of the indecent man.
Mm-hmm.
But he goes on to say that there is no group that contains only decent men,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no group that contains only indecent men.
Mm-hmm.
It's not equally dispersed, and there's fewer indecent men from his experience.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, there's both. And he talks about, for him in the concentration camps, there were other inmates that were decent, and there were other inmates that were indecent. People who enjoyed making others suffer. He talks about the capo and things like that, as well as with the soldiers.
Yeah.
The people running the camps. There were some that would actively were decent men, and some that were indecent. Some who enjoyed making him suffer, some who enjoyed making him freeze. And the same for the actual headmasters.
Mm-hmm.
But then he also talks about that a lot of it is even dependent on what their time in life is. He talks about a Dr. J who was sought for war crimes because he actively executed anybody that he found with a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to create mental illnesses for people to be executed at his penitentiary. And so he disappeared after the war. And Frankl found out years later that instead of, like everyone thought, that he went to Argentina, that he had actually stayed in Europe. And a gentleman that Frankl ran into later in life said he was the greatest guy ever. He was the most caring, most interested, He always actively worked to help others. And he used that story to talk about, we can't judge people. We can't accurately 100% predict exactly how people will behave at any given time. That people do change. That people do have. There's some things good, some things bad, and that just is.
Yeah.
Which is a quite a bit of spinoff of.
Yeah. But it's related, and I'm really glad you brought that up. What I wanted to say to that sounds like awful now, because I was gonna point out that at the end of the day, like, we can't make a mistake. But hearing him like kill a bunch of people with mental illness is a really hard moment to accept that we can't make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like, on the scale of our lives, right? Like, most of us are not in these extraordinary circumstances that are either going to bring out our inner demon or our inner angel. But we're living our lives asking, how can we live them the best that we can? In that context, like, you can't really make a mistake. Like, for years, my big goal, that brought me so much meaning, was to be the most fearless actress of my generation. And then it wasn't, right? Like, it changed for me. And like, and that was like a hard process to go through, in part because I judged the previous meaning. And I was like, oh, well, that was wasted time. Like, did I waste my time? Like, what was going? No, you can't make a mistake. As long as you're living and creating meaning, like, that, like, there is no like successful end goal. It's literally about just living in the moment. And like, meaning is something you either have or you don't have, but that judgment of it isn't as important.
Yep.
It's just important to have it. So Tiki Meher said, oh no, that's the same thing she said. One of the quotes that I liked is, so he's talking about somebody who, he's talking about a patient or just somebody, right? He says, sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. So, in other words, at any given time, this is what I think it means. At any given time in our life, we have a will to meaning, and we are expressing it. But if it's not something that is unique to ourselves, that we've created for ourselves, it means we're conforming to society or to an in-group, or we've let somebody have totalitarian-like power over us, and we're doing what they specifically are telling us to do. So, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, you're either somebody's prisoner, or, yay, I think someone followed. I don't have my alert on this scene, but hi, somebody. So yeah, so you, like, at any given moment, we are absolutely living some sort of meaning. But if it's somebody else's is controlling us. And I think that motivates me.
Yeah.
You should live my will to meaning, Yeti dude, by the way. Do not be your individual self. Do exactly what your wife tells you to do.
Oh, I'm going to use that next time I get into a fight.
Yeah, now you can just blame everything on me. You're like, no, you're my totalitarian. Totalitarian is, I don't even know what I'm saying, but you know what I'm saying. We're both looking at our quotes that we pulled from the book.
Yeah, I'm thinking, let's see.
Okay, so here's, so this is like maybe the most often quoted quote, and it's ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather he must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Thus, so then he goes on to say that logotherapy, which is his type of therapy that he developed, sees in responsibleness the very essence of human existence. You know, and again, yeah, I do too. And I think about like all the people I know of that are really unhappy. okay, this is quite the broad statement. Let's say most of the people that I know of that are really unhappy are in some part because they're not taking responsibility for themselves. They're blaming somebody else for their circumstances, you know.
I love that line that he is the ask not what the meaning of life is, but ask, you know, what your meaning to life. It's like the JFK, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Like it becomes very much a internal decision instead of an external influence. And again, we can't control external influences. Yeah, I in my coaching, sports coaching, that was one of the things that we really tried to get the players to understand, is that we can't control the external. We can't control the refs, the umps. We can't control, you know, exactly what's going to happen, but we can control how we act to it. We can control how we engage in it. And that's a very strong thought process, which is what he's talking about there with that, you know, life isn't something that inflicts its meaning on you.
Right.
You're in control of your own life, and you give meaning to your own life.
There's, I don't know if this is maybe more of an esoteric, like it's a broader concept, or it's a further removed, it's more of an abstract idea. That's what I'm trying to say. But it reminds me of this concept where, as a human being, and I don't know if this comes from like physics, or it comes from something, right? I should just get to my point. So, as human beings, we literally are reality creating machines.
Yep.
So, like, we take in things through our senses, and our brain translates that and creates reality out of it. And that goes to the colors we see, to our perception of what a chair is. And there's not a whole lot that we can do to validate that reality, right? Because we are limited by the limits of our human bodies. So if that's true, and it seems to be true, like, then of course, like on a granular level, we are responsible for our emotional realities and our perceptions that we take in relationships. Anyways. I'll do looking for quote music.
I have
okay.
One last quote, and then we've covered all of mine.
Oh, right.
He's talking about this is back to the suffering, and it's interesting. Most of my quotes are on like how he discusses suffering and how he discusses working through it, and most of your quotes are how to find like the meaning of life and move to your meaning, which I find interesting.
Yeah, we got the theoretical and the practical. I like it.
So he's talking about the prisoners at the concentration camps, and they were just trying to get through work and all the suffering and whatnot. And he says, therefore it is necessary to face up to the full amount of suffering, trying to keep moments of weakness and furtive tears to a minimum. But there was no need to be ashamed of tears, for tears bore witness that a man had the greatest of courage, the courage to suffer. Only few realized that. Shamefacedly, some confessed occasionally that they had wept, like the comrade who answered my question of how he had gotten over his edema by confessing, I had wept it out of my system. Again, that's it. That was a really strong one for me. It goes to the, you know, you shouldn't be ashamed of suffering. You know, he talks about the, you know, we're unhappy and we're taught to be ashamed of being unhappy. And same thing goes for, you shouldn't be ashamed of the tears, because it's part of your body's working through it. So I really liked kind of the openness that entailed, the almost the strength to let it be.
Yeah, I am not a man. I hope that's obvious to everybody watching. I am not a man. And what I hear from our culture a lot is that we put on men the idea of they need to be strong, that crying is a weakness. Not being a man, I can't say for sure whether or not that's true. I assume it is.
I'll go ahead and vouch that that's
Okay.
definitely
Okay. So yeah, I think for men this might be a particularly meaningful point here, which is, or particularly for men, because I think too, as a woman, like there's still a lot of judgment around crying. That it's weakness. Like maybe it's more or like women are overly emotional. Like we have our own set of cultural baggage around it.
This may sound bad,
Okay.
so
I love it. Bring it.
apologize beforehand. I don't think it's only a man thing. I think the hysterical woman is a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
The too emotional, overcrying, etc. And I think because there's the stigma that crying is weakness, even for women,
Mm-hmm.
that there are times that I've seen women cry and then feel ashamed for crying.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates almost that, it's like that anxiety that we talked about earlier of, the guy sweating and then he starts to sweat and then he starts freaking out about his sweating, so he sweats more.
Mm-hmm.
I think tears are enough of a stigma that does happen to people.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of becomes a self-perpetuating issue.
Yeah, I mean, we are all, here we go. We are all responsible for perpetuating this maladaptive cultural norm, right? Every time like somebody cries and you give them a tissue, for example, or you okay, I like the tissue example because so this is one of the things they taught us as a coach is you never hand somebody a tissue, because what that implies is oh, crying is messy. Here, let me try to fix it.
Yeah, let me clean it up for you.
Uh-oh, I think I lost you again.
It's basically saying, let me clean that up.
Yeah, it's messy. You can have tissues available and let them do it, but you don't want to perpetuate this idea that people shouldn't cry.
Yeah.
That it's not okay. And that's just an example of suffering takes many expressions or many forms, but we all are responsible for perpetuating this. And every time we don't own our own suffering and let it be seen appropriate. And by appropriately, I mean hopefully you're doing it in front of people that you can trust,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's definitely some people you might not want to be vulnerable around, right? But the vast majority of people, hopefully we can. But anyways, I really digress. But you get my point. We are let's take this responsibility thing even further and acknowledge that we all perpetuate this problem, whether we're female or male. So this, but everybody else, I have been watching a show on Netflix from Turkey. It's called Resurrection El Churro. And it's there. I think of it as the Christian network, but the Islamic network, I don't know, it's a historical time period piece. Anyways, it's strangely addicting. They've got hundreds and hundreds of episodes. The reason I bring it up is because the men in that time frame, they're all warriors for Islam, right? They're going on jihad and they're manly men. They're manly men. And yet in their culture, they cry all the fucking time. When one of their friends dies, they have the reason why there's hundreds of episodes is they show you every moment of life but pooping and sex or peeing. That's not okay. But crying, they'll show you that for minutes on end. Just the group of warriors around the dead warrior crying, sobbing and hugging each other. And they're still they're no less manly, right? In the representation that they're doing. And I just it's totally possible. And this is a really weird example of how I found that it's possible. But why isn't that here in our culture? Okay, Tika Meher says, before I leave, because my dog is saying full bladder. She wants to say your dialogue and perspective offered by Mr. and Mrs. Punch Life Back made it fun. I really appreciate your different perspectives. Yay! Oh, the name of the show, Tiki Meher, is it's Resurrection Ertugrul, but I forget
You
how to
should
spell his name.
you should type it in if you
Yeah, I'll try. You're gonna laugh when you watch it. And, you know, if it's addicting to you like it is to me, just know that it's literally hundreds of hours of your life that you're about to give away.
Yeah, you'll laugh when you see it, and then you'll watch another 120 episodes.
Like, seriously, each season has like 80 or 90 episodes. I'm not joking. It's something like that. I didn't even spell resurrection right, but there you go. Thank you, Tiki Meher, for joining us and for chatting. It was really, really fun.
I'm looking up the spelling.
Thank you. That's nice. Oh. So here's a quote that I think is cool. He's talking about his concept of tragic optimism, which is, and here's a quote, an optimism on the face of tragedy and in view of the human potential, which at its best allows for 1, turning suffering into a human achievement and accomplishment, 2, driving from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better, and 3, driving from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsible action. So it sounds like he's got this tragic optimism is kind of a cool phrase for it. So he's not discounting tragedy, but he's saying even in tragedy you can have optimism because of 3 things. You can turn your suffering into an achievement. And that goes with, like, how do you endure it, right? Like, do you endure it with your values intact and in a way that somebody who you love might judge you well for it? That you can get from guilt the motivation to change yourself for the better, which to me goes to that judgment piece. And, like, even the horrible people in the concentration camps, some of them change themselves for the better afterwards. And so, like, which we all, like, want punishment there, right? Like, that's really natural. So that's interesting. And then getting from life's transitoriness, an incentive to take responsible action. So it's like, life is really short. You can be responsible and make something of it, or you don't, but do. I don't know. I like tragic optimism.
I got a kick out of it because when I first heard the term, I was thinking he was going to be talking about being overly optimistic. That's what he was talking about. Instead, he was talking about the optimism of tragedy instead of being, overly optimistic as being optimistic during hard times, which I think it's very good.
There's something cool here too, because it's more complicated than finding the silver lining or making lemonade out of lemons. Like, because that's kind of, I think, something that, like, maybe we all can grasp pretty easily. Like, oh, I'm in this really shitty situation. How can I think of it in terms that makes it better? This is more deep and complicated and more truthful than that.
Well, and he toes the line a lot when he's talking about it, of almost taking pride in your suffering.
Yeah.
He doesn't quite say it like that, but multiple times, and the first way of handling it is specifically what I'm referring to. And there is suffering. You're going to suffer. Take pride in that suffering because it's unique to you. And I think what's very good about what he teaches and what he goes through and what he's talking about and logotherapy and finding the meaning of suffering is you're not always trying to fix it. You're not always trying to fix things. You're embracing that you are unique. and that is helping you handle the tough situations. Which is nice because it's basically giving you some way to handle everything that comes into life.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, and I don't know for sure, but I think that like good character, for lack of a better term, you don't really have it until you've gone through adversity and have endured it in a way that's created good character.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, if you never have to handle, if you're happy because life is always really good to you, are you actually a happy person, or are you just going through your life?
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
yeah.
You can't really show that that's part of your character until you've had to deal with the opposite side.
Yeah. And therefore it makes sense to me that suffering is something you can take pride in, depending on how you've endured it.
Yeah.
And if you didn't endure it well, or in a way that you're proud of, you can use that guilt to motivate yourself to do it better next time. And that, and he's so good at taking what we typically view as negative and showing us a more honest look at it, which includes showing the positive side of things, like guilt. Like we tend to judge guilt as this really terrible emotion, but it serves a really wonderful purpose. Guilt sucks to feel. We don't like to feel it as a human being, so we try to change ourselves for the better. Shame is like guilt, but I'm now really going off the deep end. Shame is not guilt. It is not motivating. It is paralyzing. But guilt is motivating.
And I would argue that guilt is part of suffering.
I don't know why. This seems to help me hear you. It's not working, though.
I would say that guilt is part of suffering. And finding meaning in your guilt helps you move on to creating bigger, better things. Shame, on the other hand, is embarrassment, which isn't really suffering. It's more... embarrassment is something you do to yourself. Shame is something you do to yourself.
Yeah.
Guilt is more a desire to have behaved differently. I think shame and embarrassment, you can both find the meaning in it and try to prosper from it, but it's harder. Fly, Dumbo, fly.
I just want to say, this is like, everybody watching, this is like our married life. I only hear half of what Dave says. So the fact that it's doing it with my fucking technology is really annoying. So guilt is you have a thought like, I really fucked up this time, or, oh, I wish I hadn't done that this time, but I'll do it next time. Whereas shame is more like, I'm a bad person because I did this. So it's guilt. Shame is a pessimistic worldview, in that you think it's something permanent about yourself. It's immutable. You can't change it. And that's why it's so toxic and not helpful. But guilt, which is the helpful version of shame, that's why I just love that he's showing us the possibility of guilt, as a positive. Because it is. We just confuse it for shame.
Yep.
Wait, oh yeah, searching for quote music.
So we've done all of mine.
Okay. He seems to talk about how, so he says, as we see, a human being is not one in pursuit of happiness, but rather in search of a reason to become happy. So he's arguing that we say we want to be happy, but really we just perceive happiness as something that will give us meaning. And what we're really should be in pursuit of is meaning, and that will bring happiness.
Yeah, I think, again, it's having concrete goals is a great way for you to move forward, but meaning isn't about the concrete goal.
Right. Yeah, and as a coach, like one of the things that you're taught to do is when someone comes to you with a goal, like you can help them get there and you do that, but you're always as the coach looking for what the real goal is underneath the goal.
Yep.
Right? Cuz a lot of times, like classic example, like so many of us want to make more money, right? But like and like be wildly rich. But the reality is we don't want to be wildly rich. We just want to have all the benefits of the feelings that we think we'll get when we're wildly rich.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, they talk about that with that. You know, people say they want a lot of money or they want to be rich. And the reality is that people want enough money.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily I want to be a millionaire. It's I don't want to have to worry about, you know, my bills. I don't have to want to worry about the basics. And that's really the goal they're going for.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, the release of all the money stress is really nice.
Yeah.
And that goes to the research that said something like up to $70,000 money does buy happiness, but beyond that it doesn't. And this is crazy because literally the next quote on my list is people have enough to live by, but nothing to live for. They have the means, but no meaning. And so commonly what you see is people who like achieve their goal, but didn't understand what they were really after, like that goal underneath the goal. Once they achieve it, they're dissatisfied because they didn't really go after what they wanted.
Yep.
And money is a classic example of that trap.
Yep.
So I love that he says they have the means but no meaning. And it's not that going after money is bad. You just want to tie it in with the meaning. Like don't leave the meaning behind. You know.
And I've known several people who were successful money-wise, and a lot of them ended up, you know, their goal was to make more money, and there wasn't a dollar amount that would actually make them happy. And I think it's because they mixed up, you know, originally it was to have enough money, and then when they hit that point they said, well, I feel better now because I have enough money. So it must be the pursuit of money that makes me feel better. And so they dive down that road to keep going.
Yeah, like it's an easy logical trap to fall into, and our culture supports it for sure. But there's something underneath this that, like, so if that's all true, and I think it is, then let's see if my brain can hold on to this insight. Then that's why this idea of taking responsibility and creating our meaning is so empowering. Because whatever we want down the road, whatever that big goal is, what we really want is meaning.
Yep.
And we have the power in this very instant to create that. Like, there are no obstacles. There are no real obstacles at all. It's only your resistance to doing it. Like, and that's crazy. It doesn't take away like I think about that and I go, well, it's going to take away like all my goals, right? Like, what do I, like, what? Like, then what do I work towards in life? But it doesn't, because meaning brings its own set of goals once you're in touch with what's meaningful to you. But yeah, you're just on a more powerful journey than you were before, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff. He says that the fact remains that meaning is completely down to earth rather than afloat in the air or resident in an ivory tower. It's what can be done about a given situation, which is nice too. Like, it's just, he's trying to make it so, he's trying to take this very abstract idea and make it very practical.
Yep.
And remind us that it's practical. Let's see. I'm getting closer to the end of my list. I'll do music again. Da, 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 da. Oh, here's that quote. Live as if you were living for the second time and had acted as wrongly the first time as you are about to act now.
All right. 1 second.
I think
I remember there was a line after that.
I have it on page 150, but I don't think that corresponds to the E version.
So it's page 109 and 150.
Mm.
So he goes on to explain it as imagine first that the present is past, and second that the past may yet be changed and amended. Such a precept confronts him with the finiteness as well as the finality of what he makes out of both his life and himself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more, understanding that you are you, and that you have an opportunity to create the world that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And to make decisions based on that belief and thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I finally, I think, get it, because I haven't gotten it at all. But it goes back to the tragic optimism quote we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The transitoriness of life. I said the word correctly. So it's about that thing. Right? Like he's saying life is short, right? Take action. But it also is about that guilt and using guilt as a motivating factor. Right? So it's like act as if you're living for a second time and you're about to act as wrongly as you did the first time.
Yep.
Right? So like he's saying anticipate what you're going to feel guilty about and do something else, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you found that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, so yeah, he says to achieve personal meaning, one must transcend subjective pleasures, so hedonic pleasures, by doing something that points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself, by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love. So we've been talking about this throughout today, but for me, this makes more sense now, because I just know like some of the modern research on this stuff. And while like transitory pleasures do increase our happiness, they don't increase our meaning, and they don't increase our purpose, which we need to have if we're going to thrive. And you want to have both. Like, don't not enjoy and savor pleasures, but don't erroneously use your physical pleasures as a sense of meaning. Like they're not actually the same thing. So meaning comes from something that's something beyond your ego, something that you love and can dedicate your life to, like a person or a cause, or like that thing that only you can create in the world that no one else can do.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that he added in the pleasures, because I think that would be a trap that we could all fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially during adversity, because that's when I use pleasure to avoid my pain. Well, and that's always like the people that eat when they're depressed, or
Dumbo ears. Why can't I hear Dave?
It's very much like the people that eat when they're depressed, or fall into their bad habits when they're down, and it's because it's the transitory pleasure instead of the overall meaning, and because it's transitory, it's temporary.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And fleeting. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't really provide a fuller life, and usually those are the things that we try to, that we beat ourselves up about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In reality, and we fall back into it over and over because we're looking for.
Yeah, they're also the things that we want our money for.
Yeah.
Like I want to become a millionaire so that I can have all these transitory pleasures.
Yep.
And they're not bad. Them in and of themselves aren't bad. They're wonderful parts of being alive. It's just when we use them to replace meaning, or to further our cultural lie that suffering doesn't exist. Like some sort of denial of this condition. Yeah. And going to the non-judgment part, like in Frankel's logotherapy, he he didn't tell people what to do. Like he never sat and told them this is your meaning.
Yeah.
He just motivated them to find it and then to live it.
Yep.
And yeah, I find that powerful because back from lurking. You're welcome to lurk anytime, Mrs. Scott Evans. Yeah, I just got distracted by her. I don't know what I was saying. Wonderful distraction.
You were saying that he didn't tell them, that he let them find their own meaning.
Yeah, because this goes back to what Tiki Meher was saying about parenting. You know, the moment we try to fix somebody, and like granted, parenting is really fucking complicated because you are responsible, right, for the person. I can only imagine how tough that is. But there does become a point where you want to let your child become their own person. And so I think in all of our relationships we can fall into a trap of trying to fix somebody or trying to control somebody because you think you know what's best for them. And he didn't do that. You know, even though he has this wealth of knowledge about how to survive and endure suffering, he didn't ever then do a prescription on somebody.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't work. It in a way I feel like when you try to control someone, which I've never ever done to you ever. Yeah, it can be more guiding and fixing when it comes to kids. But don't you think, Ms. Scott Evans, that like there comes a point in their lives where they're old enough that like you have to trust their own will to meaning, you know, more than like what you want for them, and that's probably one of the scariest things as a parent. Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. But that's what I was going to say, is that when you do try to fix somebody or like take care of them to the point where you're trying to solve all their problems, what you're doing is sending them a message you're probably not aware of, which goes something like this: I do not believe you're capable.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And like, I do not believe you should trust yourself. We're both quiet. We're reading chat. Yeah. So he was just on to so much. He was on to so much that just came out of his brain, you know, as he was going through this situation. Huh?
When you were reading this,
yeah,
was this the book he intended to write with his transcripts that ended up getting taken away?
Mm-mm.
So the book that he was trying to hide the transcripts for was a different, it wasn't the second half of this book.
Yeah, so what I remember, and I could totally be wrong, is, so what Dave's talking about is in the concentration camps, like when he went into it, he lost his manuscript. And his manuscript was for this new thing that he was developing as a psychologist or psychiatrist. And so one of his wills to meaning was to survive the camps to write the book. So I believe, Dave, that was the second half. Like the logo, because he was developing logotherapy before he went into the concentration camp. So he already had some idea about how the will to meaning is beneficial. And then his experience like really solidified his theory. But yeah, the first half is an account of his experience that he kind of had to add on to it to explain it.
Yeah. The other thing I was trying to find is what year was the book? 1945. So he wrote it right when he got out.
Yeah. And he went I think he went back to Austria. Like he went back to, I was really impressed because I would think after the concentration camp, I would try to get as far away from any of those countries as possible, but he didn't. He like went back and continued to and started serving. Yeah. In the midst of post-war, and it was just like so fucking resilient of him. He was such a badass.
Yeah.
You know.
God, there's some fascinating World War II stories in there.
Right? Yeah, like that's the other thing. Like it's a good read for all the things we've been talking about, but also just a first-person account. Yeah. You know, of what it was like. So I have just a couple that I'm looking at, seeing if we want to do them at all. If I think we've kind of covered the ground. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of a weird one to end on, but I'm going to do it because it just sounds interesting. It says that his approach stress. So they're talking about logotherapy. His approach. Wait. Okay. Yeah, it would be difficult. Seriously difficult to go back to the scenes of trauma. But you can do it if you find it meaningful. You know? Anyways, that's me talking to Scott Evans, if you didn't know. Okay, so it says his approach stressed the importance of helping people to reach new heights of personal meaning through self-transcendence. So again, it's the idea that what's meaningful is beyond yourself, which is why the transitory pleasures don't count as meaning and can't serve as something meaningful. But there's such a world of possibility in self-transcendence. So there really isn't any one way or right way to do it. And then he says that the way to do that was the application of positive effort, technique, acceptance of limitations, and wise decisions. So that's kind of like that's what he did with his patients. So that's a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like we covered good ground today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great read. It's a quick read.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really good information. It's nice because it's not, this is ABC, do this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good thought-provoking passages, bits. As far as a book goes, one of the interesting things I found is it's essentially 2 books.
It is.
It's
2 really short books.
And then his idea on logotherapy as compared to psychoanalysis, etc. And they lend well to each other, very well. But it was an interesting read because of that.
Yeah, in a way it shows like that's not what he had intended. It's just what had to happen.
Yeah.
You know, coming out of the situation. Had a thought. What you said something. Crap-a-doodles.
I don't think that's what I said.
I think that's exactly the kind of words you say all the time. Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to think like what I don't like about this book, what I didn't buy into.
I'll tell you one of the things that I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of. He falls back on religion and fate a couple times to explain why things happened, which is slightly counter to some of his other thoughts, but it's in the situation. I get why you would believe that. You know, one of the things he talks about was so early on he made choices not to go to where the gas chambers were, not to be on part of those lists, because of his will to live. And then later in the book, he talks about how he chose to go ahead and go on one of the transports that he believed was going to a gas chamber. And that because he had allowed fate to make the choice, it turned out that transport was actually going to another camp, like they were saying, instead of the gas chamber, and that they ended up executing everybody that stayed. But he kind of defends both parts of making the decision for different times in his experience as almost like it was meant to be. Which I get, because you know he survived, and only 4% survived.
I think 1 in
like
20.
Your
chances
I think
are
it's
like
1 in 28.
Even worse.
But so I get completely why you would have that, but from my perspective, I didn't like that. I would have rather he just said, you know, it's kind of luck, you know, and finding meaning in your life is what helps you move through. But you know, life throws some stuff you can't control. instead of the more, kind of almost calling it karma.
Yeah. Yeah, I too was like not uncomfortable, but I didn't really like, that's the part where I wasn't just drinking the Kool-Aid. On the one hand though, I can't really tell if he's a believer or a non-believer.
Like, he's very much a believer.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Okay. I just like, I like at the time, I think he was, but like, I didn't know like afterwards how that fell down for him or whatever. But like, what was I going to say? Like what I appreciate then is, as a believer, he still came up with a working theory that works for non-believers.
Yeah.
Because it would have been really easy to say, look, the meaning of life comes from whatever God deems for you, and you need to accept it and bear it with good character, right? Like the Bible or whatever teaches you to do. Like, that's a really much easier story to tell than taking personal, like as a believer, to say, no, you take personal responsibility for this. Like, maybe God is controlling what ultimately happens to you, but your experience of those events, whatever God deems for you, is up to you. Like, that's still really, really applicable.
Yeah.
And pretty much proven to be, like, now in modern thinking, that is how we create meaning. Like, we create meaning in our life. God doesn't give it to us, So I was upset about it too, but then I was like, oh, well, given those restrictions, he came up with an awesome book.
Exactly. And I mean, given his experiences, having some faith in a higher power makes a lot of sense.
You're saying something brilliant. I'm not going to hear
No.
it. Anyways, you want to repeat it, or are we good?
Basically, given what he was going through, having faith in a higher power makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I there's obviously, like, maybe there is data on this, because I think, didn't they like put known atheists into concentration camps?
They did, but in much smaller numbers.
I'm wondering if they had like a less of a survival rate, and if we could ever know that.
So part of his stories, there's a lot of camaraderie that they found in religion.
Yeah.
And I think that would be hard if you didn't have any way to link to your fellow.
Yeah. Yeah, the human support part of it. Yeah. Well, I'm feeling pretty complete about talking about this book. How about you? Anybody in chat? Any questions? Anything remaining? Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap up.
Let's do go ahead and throw a link from Amazon to the book in chat.
I lost you again. I heard do a link
from Amazon.
I think you have to do it. While he's doing that, so my goal is to do this book club cast once a month. And thanks, Mrs. Scott Evans. Yeah. That's kind of the bonus of the book club, of the Badass Book Club, is you don't have to read the books. If you want to, our next book is going to be Surviving Survival, The Art and Science of Resilience. And it's by, do you want to find that on Amazon too, Yeti Dude? So it's called Surviving Survival, The Art and Science of Resilience. It's by Lawrence Gonzalez. And I think he's a journalist that spent years and years and years looking at people who survive traumatic events. And then he decided to look at people who have survived a traumatic event and are surviving that survival. Because being a survivor has its own whole can of worms that he decided he wanted to study. And it's a fascinating book. He goes through like absolutely harrowing accounts of people who have been through the absolute worst and asks kind of, how do they survive the trauma and its repercussions? Why do some people thrive afterwards and others don't? I'm trying to get you back, Dave. I don't think I'm going to be able to. But anyway, so that's the next. Oh, there you are. I heard that. I heard you hit your microphone.
Oh.
So yeah, that's the next book. We're going to stream the book club cast on April 28th at the same time, 1 p.m. It's a Sunday, Pacific Standard Time. This is Yeti Dude, Dave, my husband. He's also on Twitch. He does stream from time to time, doesn't ever show his face. So he plays games. This is the first time anybody's ever seen his face on Twitch. It's pretty amazing.
Momentous moment.
It's such a wonderful face. Yeah, and I'm Punch Life Back. So I stream on Thursdays normally from like at 1 o'clock, basically Pacific time. And I'm a resiliency coach. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a community around what it takes to be fearless and really exploring, what was that face for? Exploring, what it takes to overcome anything and to honor the hero within ourselves. So yes, I think that's good. What do you think?
I think it's good. Thank you for having me. And good recommendation of a book.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being my guinea pig and prisoner / husband.
It's part of the contract.
Yeah. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. It was good. It was fun. All right.
Have a fantastic Sunday.
Yes. I will see you in a second, Dave. Bye.